Teenagers in the crowd laughed as they moved forward, throwing pebbles and making fun of the lone German shepherd who was chained by the school fence. They were unaware that this seemingly innocuous dog in the shadows was. He was an experienced K-9 who had been trained to do much more than bark. He had a track record of apprehending escaping offenders. Jakelson, a peaceful 11th grader, was about to be struck by a four-legged police who had a nose for trouble. A Pinewood High News student was requested to watch Rex, his uncle's K-9 dog. Uncle Steve, a distinguished police officer, had been summoned into an unforeseen shift for the afternoon with little warning. Jake ended up tethering Rex close to the athletic field while he completed detention because he didn't have anybody else to take the dog. Discovered that a gang of bullies had been hankering over a fresh victim to push about, and they had noticed. When the tethered shepherd noticed Jake's apprehension, he seized the chance. At first, the taunting was. Rex hardly flinched when a few cat cries and paper wads were thrown in the distance. Trained to disregard innocuous distractions, but the bullies became more confident and moved closer, insulting Jake and Trevor, a particularly rowdy teenager, felt it would be amusing to poke the dog with a stick the rest of the time. Encouraged him, unaware that beneath that serenity, Rex was no typical pet. Outside, there was sharp intelligence and refined instincts ready to defend civilians, particularly his temporary. Jake, the handler, was only able to observe from a few feet away. He was aware that Rex was disciplined, but he was also able to respond quickly and decisively if Jake saw a threat and begged the bullies to stop, but Trevor merely scoffed and waved his. A small throng gathered, sniffing drama, and Jake's palms became clammy as he brandished the stick like a weapon. Trevor attacked again, as his remarks were ignored. Should he call for assistance? Could he defuse the situation on his own? Aiming the stick at Rex's face this time, the dog's training kicked in his ears and pinned his muscles in a single second. A low, dangerous growl rolled from his chest as his tight eyes narrowed. They made a suspect's spine tingle. The bullies halted for a moment, just enough time for Rex to pretend that their taunts were about to backfire and that they had chosen the incorrect dog. Rex gave Jake his icy growl, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest dramatically. Ever since Jake was a child, being aware of how great his uncle's German shepherd was, Uncle Steve enjoyed bragging about Rex's adventures while training the K-9 team. Rex wasn't merely a family pet in search and rescue. He was a functioning cop who assisted with narcotics detection and suspect apprehension, with steely nerves and fangs to match, and those teeth were now clearly visible. Trevor the ringleader was bared in a snarl that caused the bullies to pause in mid-step. Gazed at the dog, his bluster faltering. He gripped the stick tighter, as if it would shield him from the dog. Surrounded by an attack, the tiny group of bystanders grew silent, unsure if. Jake could almost feel the tension igniting in the afternoon heat as he considered whether to run for cover or to encourage the altercation. Jake took a deep breath and moved toward Rex in the hopes that his presence would soothe the dog and remind him that this was just a group of stupid teenagers, not real criminals. He remarked quietly, "Rex, stand down." Uncle Steve had given him some basic instructions, but Jake's mind was spinning too quickly to remember the precise disengage training phrase. One of Marshall, a large child who was one of Trevor's friends, sneered, "Your dog's all bark, no bite," even though he didn't. He was completely convinced when a second child picked up a rock and held it in his palm, seemingly debating whether to. With every second that passed, the tension increased as the bullies attempted to maintain their composure in the face of a snarl they. Jake wasn't expecting to see the dog's strong body coiled like a chain tugging against Rex's collar. Every muscle in Rex's legs shook, ready to leap if needed, like a spring trapped in a standoff with Trevor. Jake was aware that if Trevor made another move, Rex might take it as a real threat, and there would be no turning back. The last thing Jake wanted was to have to justify Rex's choking on a teenager to Uncle Steve or the cops. "Hey," Jake said in a stronger tone, "just back off." All right, he's not a ordinary dog who is K-9 trained. He underlined the phrase in the hopes that Trevor's face tensed as everything clicked in their minds. "You think I'm scared of some mutt?" He spat, but he took a half step back. It appeared as though he would leave, but suddenly some inner Bravado, or perhaps peer pressure caused him to lunge forward and swung the stick at Rex's muzzle. That was all the provocation Rex needed when he yelled, "Get lost!" The dog lunged. He tightened his jaws around the wooden staff, rattling the forward chain as he snapped at it in a terrifyingly fast manner. Trevor staggered backward, his mouth gaping as it splintered the wood in a matter of seconds. A quick wave of gasps swept over the crowd as Rex spat forth sharp fragments. The swarm of bullies naturally dispersed once the innocuous dog demonstrated his deadly potential. But Trevor, stunned, the Rex planted his paws and let forth another spine-ling growl that reverberated throughout the. Jake in the playground would be upset if Rex determined that Trevor posed a serious threat to the canine. There would be an unstoppable surge, a takedown that was entirely instinctual. Jake seized the leash, shaking off his nervousness, and explained how Uncle Steve had trained him to deal with criminals on the run. "Rex, heel," he commanded, using all the authority he could summon to keep Rex locked for a heartbeat. Trevor's ears flattened, as if he understood Jake's order to the dog. Moved back, the chain jangling with each step, the chest still pumping with adrenaline. His pals hovered a dozen paces as Trevor let out a stiff, nervous exhale. One of them, obviously frightened, yelled, "Dude, forget this, let's go," by the dog's aggression, but Trevor's dignity prevented him from giving up so easily. Approached Jake in a terrified and enraged manner, saying, "You nearly had your dog attack me," his voice quivering at the edges. Jake sprang back in shock, suppressing his own terror as he shook his head. "You were the one who struck him with the stick." Bravery. He was simply defending himself and me. "If you don't want conflict, get away from him before Trevor does." A harsh voice burst through the tension and retorted, "What's going on here, everyone?" Turned to see Mr. Caldwell, the athletic coach at the school, walking across the grass. A tall, broad-shouldered man examined the scene with rapid authority. Trevor was leaning against a tree, a German shepherd was silently gritting his teeth, and there was a shattered stick on the ground. Appreciated whatever drove Mr. Caldwell. The coach saw Jake standing close to the dog and knew it was the Bullies. Defensive stances, and when you saw that you kids were playing with a police dog, he growled and raised an eyebrow at Trevor, and his pal shrank, unsure of how to present the narrative that it wasn't our fault. "I don't know," but as the child screamed that dog's nuts, Coach Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Officer Steve added, "I know this dog's partner, right?" as he turned to Jake. Jake nodded with relief, realizing that he and Coach Caldwell had probably met. Trevor struggled to regain his composure during community activities with Uncle Steve. "He attacked us," Jake pointed out. He broke that after Trevor tried to poke him in the face. He stated steadily, pointing to the broken stick. "He's all of you come with me." The coach sighed disapprovingly, adding, "You can't just mess with a trained canine. We'll see what the principal has to say about harassing an animal on school grounds." The order waved to the Bullies, and he softened his tone toward Jake. "Can you calm Rex? He doesn't want any more." Jake nodded and reached for Rex's collar, but the dog remained agitated, breathing heavily, but at least he had ceased his snarl. "Easy boy," Jake murmured. He could feel the stress gradually releasing from Rex's body as he caressed the thick fur behind his ears. The Bullies behind Coach while the dog's eyes stayed alert in a close cluster. Trevor dragged his feet toward the main building, glaring at Jake over his shoulder with resentment. Paused to get his breath, his pulse still racing from the exhilaration. Rex sat down, his ears twitching as though he was looking for further dangers. A few interested bystanders lingered and whispered among themselves. One or two applauded Jake, pleased by what they had just seen, but Jake's hands trembled as he reached for, thinking about sending Uncle Steve an SMS on the event before he. "Are you okay?" The volunteer who had been on jail duty stammered, his eyes wide. Ty observed what occurred in the distance. Jake nodded slowly, and then looked at the dog, who now tilted his head at him. "Yeah, thanks to Rex." Jake's voice sounded less like the intimidating canine who had just broken a stick and more like the devoted friend he was at home. Jake realized in a matter of seconds that the principal would still demand statements, and the Bullies may harbor resentment. Uncle Steve had an urgent appointment to pick up. Jake had to find a way to explain everything to Rex quickly without coming across as uncontrollable, since although Rex had adhered to his training, it was evident that the dog would stop at nothing to keep Jake safe, which may be consoling if, although there were actual criminals present, a final pat on Rex's head could lead to trouble in the chaotic world of high school bullies. Jake stood up to follow the group to the principal's office, knowing that news would get out from this point on. Knew it was a line no to mess with Jake Larson's dog because it meant dealing with a well-trained, no-nonsense canine. Jake's knees felt like jelly as he followed Coach Caldwell and the gang of bullies, and he longed to cross again. Rex padded alertly next to the principal's office, but he was no longer on the. Rumors spread quickly at Pinewood, as Jake felt threatened by other students in the corridor who were about to attack the stairs. Whether that was a good thing or not, the story of AK-9 dog confronting troublemakers would only encourage more discussion. Alternatively, Mr. Peterson, the principal, was a stout man with a. He looked up from a pile of papers, his brows always furrowed, and when he spotted the German, they shot skyward. "What in the world?" said Shepard in the doorway of his office. "We've had an incident now by," Coach Caldwell said, clearing his throat. Jake, a police-trained canine, was attempting to maintain order on the athletic field where a bunch of teenagers were causing trouble. Jake, however, stabilized himself and breathed through the remaining tension. Trying to appear both innocent and defiant, Trevor and his companions gathered in a group with their shoulders hunched. They continued to hold the shattered pieces of the stick, which only made them appear more guilty. Mr. Peterson's eyes darted. "How about you all take a seat?" Mr. Peterson asked, surrounded by the scared bullies, the battered stick, and the vigilant dog. His tone was stern and demanding, but not hostile, as he gestured to the chairs and said, "And someone explain exactly what happened." "Oh, cut it," said Marshall, a friend of Trevor's, in a blurt. "The dog attacked us. We were just minding our own business." "Out," Coach Caldwell said, interrupting me with his arms crossed over his wide chest. Jake swallowed, going forward and gently guiding Rex to sit at his side, knowing it was not the whole truth. Rex, my uncle's canine partner, started speaking quietly but steadily as I was wrapping up incarceration, so I restrained him close to the fence, so he wouldn't disturb anyone. But Trevor and his friends arrived and began hurling objects at him while brandishing a stick. Trevor stared at us as we played around. How could we have known the dog was a special police officer? Mr. Peterson held up a hand to stop them, turning back to face Jake. Yes, Jake confirmed that they simply threatened and taunted Rex, snarled and snapped the stick when Trevor tried to prod him, but he didn't harm anyone. Marshall then interrupted the foolish mutt. The principal leaned back, his voice cracking anxiously, but even he was unable to fully commit to the deception. "Hand you, young man," he whispered, cradling his fingers in his chair. Trevor thought that intimidating an animal on school property was appropriate. Trevor murmured, "It was just a stick," as he looked at Mr. He looked at Coach Caldwell, who sighed in gloomy agreement and nodded. Principal looked around the room and said, "I think Jake's account of what happened is more credible than AK-9 dogs. Usually get aggressive until they perceive a genuine threat, which is what these dogs are taught to do," he said, pausing his eyes. "I'm disappointed since this type of behavior is inappropriate and we'll need to take into consideration settling on the bullies." Disciplinary action at this point. The bullies writhed and exchanged uncomfortable glances. Trevor's confidence burst like a burst balloon. They most likely anticipated a severe warning or reprimand rather than an real disciplinary record that could be seen by their parents or possibly the police. While Jake sighed, he was relieved that Rex wouldn't be held accountable, but the relief was gradually mixed with worry. Coach Caldwell cleared his throat as the prospect of problems following him, and perhaps his uncle still loomed, moving the. "Principal Peterson, I can watch these boys for the time being because of the tension in the room." The principal acknowledged, but perhaps it would be better if Jake took the dog home to reduce the likelihood of other occurrences. Thoughtfully, "Jake, that makes sense. I suppose your uncle will come get the dog." "Yes." Sir Jake quickly responded that he's off duty in an hour, and that I may phone him to come. "I'll need statements from everyone. But for now," Trevor Marshall and Mr. Peterson looked at the group earlier if you'd want. "Jake, stay here till your uncle comes. The rest of you wait outside. Coach will come with you," argued. The bullies slouched with their heads down and muttered obscenities. Coach Caldwell ordered them to hasten their pace after the dog emitted a low growl of caution as they passed Rex. Jake took a seat opposite Mr. Peterson's desk and petted him while they followed to make sure they didn't run out of the corridor. The principal caressed Rex's head absently, saying, "Son, your uncle's a respected town official. You are aware that bringing a trained K-9 onto school grounds may cause issues." Jake's stomach turned over. "I apologize, sir. My uncle had to do this at the last minute. Phoned, and because I couldn't leave Rex alone at home, I reasoned that it would be safe to tie him up away from the majority of the students." Mr. Peterson, soften a little bit. "I get it, but please clarify it with me going forward," or another administrator. "But considering the situation, I'll overlook it this time." After a moment of stillness, Jake nodded, swallowing his shame. "I hope you understand how easily things can get out of hand." "Jake, you're not in trouble. Those bullies are," the principal said. He looked at Rexon and said, "I'd advise you to remain hidden until your uncle shows up to prevent any more confrontations." Jake whispered, "My secretary can let you wait in the staff lounge if you like." He was breathing steadily. He gave Rex an unconscious thank you for the dog's silent devotion by scratching behind his ears, and the two of them departed. Jake saw Trevor as they passed the front office windows while being escorted by a nice administrative assistant to the principal's office, and his team sitting glumly on a seat in the hallway. Their day appeared to have been. To make matters worse, the staff lounge was deserted, with a shabby couch and a partially operational vending machine. Jake slid onto the couch, allowing Rex to lie down at his feet. The first burst of adrenaline had burned off, leaving him exhausted, so he took out his phone and sent a text message saying, "Uncle Steve needs you at school ASAP. Sort of urgent. I'll explain in a few minutes." Uncle Steve's phone buzzed. Jake typed back, "On my way, everything okay?" In response, "We're fine." When Bullies attempted to disrupt work, Rex said, "He's a hero, but comes soon." Jake put his phone down and glanced down at the dog, who looked back at him with serene brown eyes. And Jake was astounded that the same creature had lunged with horrifying power. But suddenly Rex was the picture of calm, as though declaring, "I've got you covered, child. Everything is underhand." Shortly after, footsteps were heard. Uncle Steve was still in uniform in the hallway when his eyes shifted to Rex. Jake inquired, "You two okay?" as a wave of relief passed over his features. Jake walked quickly across the room, letting go of a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Yeah," he murmured. Rex's bullies are softly reciting the incident in short terms. When the principal learned how far things had progressed, Steve's face hardened, but it wasn't the first time. Steve whispered as he knelt to examine Rex's collar, "Good job, boy," praising the ruffling. "Time punks have underestimated a K-9. Rex, the dog's furry companion, soaked up the loving tone by waving his tail. When Mr. Peterson entered, he nodded courteously and said, "Officer's son, I take it." Shaking the principal's hand, Steve said, "Yes, sir, thank you for getting in touch with me. And I appreciate the school's understanding that we only want to make sure that everyone is safe and that the regulations are." Mr. Peterson stated that Jake outlined the situation, saying the key, "Since these bullies are upsetting the dog, disciplinary action will be taken." Uncle Steve's expression stiffened. "I would have arrested them for harassing a police officer if they had done this to Rex on the street. Beast, but I guess punishment at school will suffice." He gazed at Jake's gentle eyes. Jake nodded. "You did fine, kid. You used the commands I taught you." I mostly attempted to prevent him from smiling shyly and pulling at his lips. Steve chuckled faintly and continued, "That's the proper call, I'm glad you kept him quiet since he was trained for much worse." Mr. Peterson pointed to "You can leave the hallway, but to prevent any further disputes, one of my employees will accompany you. If we require any information, I'll." Jake exhaled easier now that they had authorization to call. "Thank you, sir." "Go." He gently pulled on Rex's leash, and the dog obeyed calmly, though he gave him a weary look. They were outside in the fresh air in the late afternoon, as if they were half expecting those troublemakers to reappear in a few minutes. A breeze ruffled Rex's fur as sunshine spilled across the school parking lot, and Jake felt a sense of relief. Uncle Steve placed a comforting hand on his nephew's shoulder as the remaining tense swirl slowly dissipated, saying, "You did. All right," he said. "Let's go home. I need to submit a quick report, but that's standard." He lowered his voice, saying, Rex Jake, let me know if those bullies ever cause you any problems again. I believe they learned their lesson since they chuckled partly in relief and half in appreciation. Uncle Steve laughed as he recalled Trevor's wide-eyed expression when Rex broke the stick, indicating that they had chosen the incorrect dog. Indeed, they got into Steve's police SUV, with Jake sitting in the passenger seat and Rex in the rear, prepared to return to a more tranquil environment. As Jake watched the engine roar to life, he thought that on Monday, he might be recognized as the youngster with the fierce police dog in the school building, but he wasn't sure how. He had imagined himself fitting in at a new school, but it was preferable than being just another faceless person in the crowd. He and Rex might have one if this experience deterred future abuse, because Bullies had a way of hiding in every corner. Yet a skilled K-9 partner might reverse the situation more quickly than any insult or remark. When Jake saw Rex's composed face in the rearview mirror, he felt a surge of pride because they were a team. Back at home, Jake had an unexpected confrontation that no bully would quickly forget. Exhausted, Rex collapsed onto the living room sofa after taking off his backpack. Before lying at Jake's feet, Uncle Alert patted around the home to get acquainted with familiar smells. Steve was rummaging through documents at the kitchen counter, periodically glancing anxiously at his nephew. "Are you certain you had a rough day?" Steve inquired, placing a stack of forms down. Jake gave a nod. He stopped, then glanced down at his eyes and rubbed them, saying, "I'm fine, just drained." If Rex hadn't been there, he would have been observing him with those serene brown eyes. Uncle Steve followed Jake, who left because he didn't want to think about how terribly those bullies might have pushed things. "Rex is a partner on duty or off," Jake stated gently, "but keep in mind that he'll react to alleged threats, which might be problematic if others are unaware that he is a K-9 trainer." Jake swallowed. Yes, things nearly got out of control, and he briefly felt guilty for putting Rex in danger by bringing him to school. If not, the dog would have to be left unattended or alone. He dismissed the idea, telling himself that it was an inevitable circumstance that no one could have foreseen those bullies would be so careless in the days that followed, and Jake was the target of a lot of gossip at school. The bullies who incited Rex were suspended, and in Pinewood High's tiny social network, it was significant. Trevor, their ringleader, seems to have disappeared from campus, most likely as the family faces the anger of their disgruntled parents. Several children give Jake sidelong glances in, partly impressed, partly terrified. Some even came up to him and asked, It's true that your dog broke a stick in two? Did he even come close to attacking Trevor?" "Jake, Rex is a trained police dog," he would reply cautiously, explaining that he only takes action when someone threatens him. He tried not to brag, but he felt a tiny, odd sense of fulfillment that no one had pushed or taunted him once since the incident, which felt like a barrier of protection for a new kid in town, but one that was founded on intimidation in spite of Jake's recent respite for bullying. Couldn't get rid of a persistent worry that Rex was still in the prime of his K-9 career and that any negative event may agree that if Trevor got even a scratch from a dog bite, the department may compensate the bullies for their injuries. Having started an investigation, Uncle Steve may also be affected. The more Jake considered it, the more he. One afternoon around a week later, they realized they had narrowly avoided a true crisis. When Jake got home from school following the altercation, Uncle Steve was inspecting Rex's gear harness collar. "Protection vest when we received a call," he said. The voice was tinged with adrenaline. "Rex and I are leaving while the burglary is ongoing," and Jake nods and moves aside to allow them to pass in a rush of activity, with man and dog prepared and on their way to the patrol SUV. Jake felt a twinge of worry as he watched them leave. Risk was a part of Rex's job, but for some reason, seeing the dog in uniform brought the playground incident back to life. Once more, Rex was not your typical pet. He was a part of a larger, perilous world. When Uncle Steve and Rex eventually returned, the sun had already started to set. Their entry was. Jake looked up from his homework problem right away as he heard the dog's paws shuffling on the floor, which was quieter than usual. Prompted by Steve's somber look, "What happened?" Jake asked, standing up fast. Steve exhaled heavily as he saw that Rex appeared quiet and tail low, as if the day had worn him down. "Captured the suspect," who attempted to flee but was defeated by Rex during the altercation. Becomes somewhat roughed up, pointing to a tiny bandage that was carefully wrapped over the dog's flank, indicating a minor cut. However, he needs to relax. Jake squeezed his chest and knelt down, stroking Rex's. The dog whined softly close to the bandage as it leaned into Jake's touch. Jake whimpering at the idea of the dog fighting a real criminal. At least you're okay. Bet the. Uncle Steve nodded briefly. The suspect felt bad for playing with him. This job is difficult for him, he said, setting aside his radio and belt before sitting at the table with a weary expression on his face. And me, but we do it since it's what we're taught to do. Jake detected a hint of something in his uncle's voice as Steve groaned. You sound worried, even though he had more on his mind than just the operation that day. Given his advanced age and the growing number of minor injuries, I'm not sure how long Rex can continue to live. He's still in excellent health, but dogs too have a retirement age, and any significant occurrence could hasten that age. Jake's gut nodded. He hadn't thought that Rex was as unstoppable as he appeared to be. As his service draws to a close, do you believe he'll retire soon? I am unsure. There may be another year or two remaining in the field if everything works well, but I can't ignore the indications. Uncle Steve rubbed his eyes throughout the day, clearly stressed. At least, as is customary, he can live with us, or possibly with me permanently after he retires. A part of Jake felt relief at the idea that there would be no more risky activities, protective vests, or altercations with crooks, but another part, that the dog enjoyed his job and thrived on it while lounging at home. Even love might not be enough to satiate that strong desire as the days turned into weeks and the stress of Though the recollection of the schoolyard incident gradually disappeared from everyday talk, Jake nevertheless felt a peculiar sense of. Rex continued his work with the department, exercising caution every time he passed the fence where it occurred, answering calls with steadfast expertise. But every time he came back, Jake couldn't get rid of the concern that in Jake's phone one evening could cost him everything in an unexpected confrontation. Buzzed suddenly, and a number he didn't recognize appeared on the screen, responding to. Heard a voice that seemed familiar. Trevor. Jake nearly hung up the phone in. I understand your disbelief, but why was Trevor approaching him? Trevor's tone was reserved. Number from a friend. I wanted to apologize for the day I spent with your dog. Was acting like a fool. Jake blinked in astonishment, his words briefly leaving him as he paced the living room, looking. What made you name me Trevor now? I groaned at Rex, who was sleeping happily on a rug. Let's just say my parents weren't pleased with the suspension they instilled in me, because his swagger was conspicuously lacking. The principal threatened a record, so I suppose I realized how dangerous it could have been if your dog had actually gone off. I'd be messed up, so sorry. Jake felt a range of feelings, including relief, tentative acceptance of lingering bitterness. Thanks, he said, merely uncertain of what. Trevor acknowledged, yeah, but he added, I guess we're all lucky it didn't get worse. Anyway, be careful until. I thank your dog for not tearing my head off. And Jake nearly burst out laughing. It was unbelievable to see Rex getting a personal apology. I will, he said. He released a breath he had been holding as he hung up, thinking, if Trevor, who was once so haughty, could make peace, perhaps things were finally calming down. He walked across the room and knelt by Rex's. That was Trevor, said the dog as it blinked awake and gave a languid tail wag. Jake scratched lightly behind Rex's ears and added, he says he's sorry. Rex answered, by curling his muzzle and yawning, giving off what Jake liked to think was a dog smile. Jake experienced a true feeling of closure for the first time since the altercation, offered a loving rattle to Rex's collar, and said, you really are something the wrong dog to pick on for sure. Pleased to be the silent hero that no one could intimidate, nuzzled Jake's hand. And Jake understood how profound that moment was when he saw the youngster and dog side by side. They were pals that supported one another in a world that may turn upside down, in addition to being nephew and uncle's K9S. But in an instant, a cool breeze blew across the area the next week, causing the remainder of the autumn foliage while riding his bike home from school. Jake played back Trevor's unexpected phone call in his. A slight sense of relaxation had descended upon him, and Trevor's apologies implied that the previous tension might be at last put to rest. But a strand of worry still runs through his mind. Couldn't take away the fact that Rex had nearly died that day. What if that happened again with greater repercussions? Jake sighed as he walked into his driveway and saw Uncle. He discovered Steve searching through a patrol SUV parked outside. The kitchen cabinet appeared unusually agitated, and Rex sat submissively with ears pricked up as though on hold on for instructions. Everything is okay, Jake said, taking off his backpack. Uncle Steve exhaled like if he had been dragged into a last-minute overtime. Duty tonight. They need more K-9 units for crowd control because there's a large event downtown. I was hoping to catch. He shook his head, saying, I'll be gone until late. Could you keep me a break? Keeping a watch on Rex, Jake said without hesitation. Yes, sure. I'll just do my. Is he not going with you to do your homework and hang out with you? Steve said, not tonight, as he slipped several dog toys into a little duffel. The kinds had a rotation schedule, and the chief wants him to take it easy in case something major happens. Goes down tomorrow, so I'll be the only one walking patrol. Jake looked at Rex. He seemed sad that he wasn't included, but Jake informed him that he was wonderful company and patted the dog. Even though he was still troubled by the incident with the bullies, he had learned to value Rex's consistent presence more than before. Steve nodded appreciatively. And I'll put out additional dog food. Additionally, as you are aware, since that burglary takedown, he has been a little stiff in his back leg. So make sure Jake acknowledged that roughhousing isn't necessary, mentally recording the directions as Steve started to move for the door, but he stopped and said, oh, and if you go out, keep the door locked. Bring your keys, as minor thefts have been on the rise lately. He gave a fictitious salute and ran out, leaving Jake in. Hours passed uneventfully while Rex was by himself. Jake completed his homework throughout this time. Around 8 p.m., Jake fell asleep in the living room, periodically moving or stretching to relieve his aching leg. When he realized he was going hungry, he dug into the refrigerator and found some microwavable vegetables and leftover chicken. Rex became excited by the scent of food, but he was instructed to wait once by a mild hand signal. When Jake was done eating, he gave Rex a few little nibbles from his bowl. The heater was humming quietly that evening, calming the two of them into a feeling of safety. Then, around 9:30, Jake heard the dull thump outside sounded like someone running into a fence post or a trash can. Jake's pulse raced as he cocked his head toward the front window, his ears going tight and his whole body tensing. Probably simply a stray cat or raccoons, he reminded himself, continuing Uncle Steve's caution. He stood with a memory of small larceny, and Rex was by his side in a moment, his tail dropped in a watchful manner. Jake approached the dog with caution, his instincts on full alert. He couldn't see much more than a gentle ruffle when he peered through the peephole at the front door. Arrived from the house's side, next to the garage, whispering, stay, and setting a. The dog shook with intense concentration as the hand on Rex's collar awaited a command. In an attempt to improve the view through the window, without glare, Jake turned off the lights in the living room. He caught a glimpse of a figure skulking along the fence in the dim light of a street lamp. The figure stooped, and my heart lurched. It was a person, not a raccoon, tinkering with something close to the garage door. Are they attempting to cause a shock? Jake felt a flash of terror, followed by an unanticipated spike of adrenaline. Uncle Steve was on job, but he most likely took his phone downtown. Should I do this? And, trembling, contacted 911. The operator remained on the line as he reported a strange individual on the property. Inquiring further, Jake gave the suspect's height and attire, while Rex gave off a low. Jake was told to stay inside by the operator, who had growling eyes focused on the door. She vowed to remain silent and wait for the police, who would arrive shortly. Her tone was calm yet urgent at all times. Jake watched the intruder attempt to pry open a side window about an hour ago, and a metallic scrape reverberated in the night air. Rex's hackles lifted, and he started to pace, obviously attempting to stop Jake from swallowing hard. He didn't want to startle the intruder and start a fight inside the house, so he chose to remain silent instead of crying out. However, allowing the man to roam freely outside was also unsettling. Eventually, far-off sirens broke the silence. Jake hastened as the intruder's head snapped up, clearly realizing that the risk was too great, and he ran for the street. Rushed to the front window in time to witness the wail of sirens disappear beyond neighbor's hedge. Jake shakily exhaled as the lights at the end of the block began to flash more loudly. With his tension released, he reassured Rex by patting him and saying, "It's okay," muttered, but his heart continued to gallop, and a few seconds later, 2 patrol cars arrived, their spotlights sweeping across the. With flashlights in hand, yard officers swept the area, and Jake broke the. Rex was on a short leash when the front door opened, and, as he called them over, a tall officer came up with his palm resting on his. "You the one who contacted 911? Holstered firearm?" "Yeah." Jake stumbled while attempting to. I heard him steady his voice, and he fled in that direction when he noticed someone attempting to enter the garage. When he heard sirens, the officer nodded and shone his flashlight around. "We'll try to find him, but you and the dog should remain where you are." Rex and Jake stepped back inside and locked the door after a fellow police sprinted off toward the neighbor's hedge. Jake saw flashlight flickers flickering through the neighborhood as more backup arrived as the minutes passed. Windows and the sound of radios crackling. He let out a breath and sank down on the couch. If the invader had forced his way through, Rex would have been standing guard near the door, tail up. The idea that Rex might have behaved based only on K-9 training made Jake cringe within. The break-in, which may potentially result in a violent encounter in a perverse way, reminded Jake once more that Rex wasn't your average dog. In the correct situation, he could be a live weapon in addition to being a competent protector. Thankfully, the man fled after a tense quarter hour when the police knocked loudly. Jake heard a muffled voice peek through the peephole, and then allowed the police in. The man appeared unhappy and unsuccessful. "We'll continue to patrol you. We caught him, but he most likely climbed fences until he managed to escape the neighborhood. Did the right thing by phoning us rather than attempting to face him directly." Jake nodded in relief, and with a strange sense of frustrated, the invader disappeared, leaving only a crooked window frame, as proof that nobody was harmed and that the cop only caused minor damage. A brief statement, and departed with the assurance that the station would submit a formal report by. Jake's heartbeat eventually calmed, but his nerves were still tense as he calmed down over the home, he became aware of how dark it was outside, well after 10 o'clock. He looked at Rex, who gave him a close look as though sensing his uneasiness. "You're a real guardian," Jake whispered. Rex let out a low woof while bending over and softly pressing his forehead against the dog. Jake gave a reassuring sigh, but soon the strain overwhelmed his weary thoughts, so he turned off the. Rex went to his bedroom after double-checking the locks and making sure he wasn't too far away. Following the incident, Jake laid in bed and gazed at the ceiling, repeating the. In a single month, you defend yourself against bullies at school, and then almost run into a burglar here. Exhausted. Rex is always there, and a wary sense of thankfulness settled over him. Even though the dog's official service days may be coming to an end, Steve is always prepared. Had suggested that Jake understood their relationship went beyond their work duties because Rex wasn't just the. In addition to being the ideal dog for protecting this house and its occupants in silence, Jake was also the wrong dog for bullies to taunt. Rex climbed up and placed his chin on Jake's knee while huffing contentedly as he reached down to pat. Bed. Boy and K9 sank into a guarded quiet during this serene period, aware of the outside world might suddenly become dangerous, but they would work together to deal with whatever happened a few days after the attempted. Uncle Steve noticed that Jake was more reserved than normal during the break-in. Jake grinned slightly when Rex trotted over to prod him, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes as he sat down. Steve found Jake at the kitchen table and decided it was time for a conversation. Rex coiled around his feet as he absently browsed through his phone. "Kiddo Steve." Jake looked up and started sitting across from him, saying, "You've been through a lot lately. Everything okay?" He looked hesitantly at Rex, who gave him a calmly expectant look in response. He tried to appear informal when he answered, "I'm fine, just thinking," but the sluggishness of his. Steve pushed his hands lightly on the table and asked, "About the school incident or the burglar?" His shoulders had betrayed him. "Both. It's like in just a few weeks," Jake said, lowering his voice as he shrugged. "Both, I guess. With AK, 9 around. I've witnessed how stressful life can get between bullies playing with him and that thief who nearly busted. Steve groaned, nodding. Yes, it seems like trouble is always just around the corner. Can have that feeling at times since Rex is trained to deal with dangers. But that training also means we come across a lot of them. Pausing to carefully choose his words. It's acceptable to feel frightened. Jake's eyes widened in surprise when you became startled too, of course. I've been on calls where Rex had a hunt for armed people in dark buildings. Steve acknowledged as he leaned back in his chair. Suspects my heart is always racing. But fear is a good thing, since it keeps us alert. Jake took that in silence before gathering the nerve to pose a question, as long as we don't allow it to paralyze us. You suggested that he might be approaching retirement, because that had been ignoring him. Will we retain him if he quits his job, or does he find another one? The handler usually gets first pick to adopt, and sure, that would be me. A momentary shadow flickered in Steve's eyes. I'm not letting him go anywhere else, he said, reaching down to ruffle the dog's tail and Rex's ears. We'll find ways to keep him busy that will comfort him, even though he might miss the adrenaline high from thumping on the floor. Jake was more than prepared for the possibility of losing Rex to a new. He had been burdened by his family or the work itself, so you're essentially, when it occurs, be ready for him to become a full-time house dog. Yes, Steve. Verified that he has merited that rest. In the interim, we proceed day by day. They were both startled when the doorbell rang, and Rex sprung to his feet, his ears perked up. With a protective impulse, he moved between Jake and the door. A low moan hummed in his throat until Steve put a soothing touch on his leash. Easy boy, he whispered, looking at. When Jake looked out the window, he saw a UPS driver carrying a small package. A wave of relief passed over him. Steve opened the door, took the item, and thanked them, feeling a little embarrassed by how jittery they both were. The driver, Rex, kept a close eye on the entire conversation, although not entirely. That's the new chew toy I ordered for Rex, Steve said, shaking his head, before the truck roared away. Jake made a feeble giggle, which I suppose indicates that we're all on the same page. He smiled half-heartedly, hoping he would like it more than your sneakers. Watching Steve place the item on the kitchen counter, he was on edge. What if he? Hesitantly, I learned some more complex commands so that I could better manage him if it happened again. Remembered how he had fumbled to come up with the appropriate phrases to either disengage or heal Steve's expression that day at school. Brightened, that's a good idea. Typically, certified handlers receive advanced K-9 training, but I can show you. He paused, his eyes crinkling and thinking, some basic things. Rex already trusts you, so it shouldn't be too difficult. But we must exercise caution because his training is intended for actual dangers, as Jake stated resolutely. Sparks are flashing, and I simply want to be ready so that I don't panic. Steve nodded in agreement. All right, let's begin by reiterating the stay. Perhaps we'll practice stand down, which is typically a high-level instruction, once we learn how to heal commands under pressure. Following dinner, the two decided to have a little training session in the sun in the backyard. Jake felt uneasy as he sunk under the fence, casting dark shadows over the lawn. Flutter was given the leash by Steve. Steve advised him to stand upright and speak steadily because Rex could read your body language as much as your words. Jake answered firmly after taking a deep breath. Rex, heel. Jake strolled with a sense of pride as the dog trotted to his left side, eyes attentive. He stopped after a few steps, letting the leash slack, Rexing stay, and the dog instantly stopped as well. Steve added, so far so good now for the trickier part, with a composed and poised stance. He recognizes this from training when he takes a bite sleeve out of the storage container. Typically, we use it to mimic dubious behavior. I won't let him overreact, but see how he responds to moderate provocation. He put on the protective sleeve. Steve braced himself, gulped, and walked a few yards away, turning to face the dog. Steve pretended with a deep snarl. The dog's ears sprang up in a menacing pose, waving the sleeve as though to challenge Rex. Jake froze as his chest began to vibrate. Rex, stand down, he ordered for him. Rex looked like he was about to lunge, muscles and teeth bared, but then he glanced at Jake, observing his composed yet firm posture, and retreated with. Steve stepped forward to pat the irritated huff, saying, good boy. Jake, that was spot on. You kept your composure. Rex answered from the dog's flank. Jake released the breath he had been holding, feeling a surge of pride and relief. That's exactly what we want. He immediately felt more a part of Rex's world, which is one of high stakes, black and white directives, and they continued to demonstrate their everlasting allegiance until the dust became heavy. After a while, Jake's adrenaline subsided into a gratifying glow, and he saw a glimpse of the might behind Rex's. Training and the accuracy needed to control it brought back memories of the school bullies, and he knew that without a few key orders and Rex's guidance, that situation may have easily gone disastrous. He thanked Steve. "Thanks for showing me this." As they led Rex inside, Steve patted Jake's head and said, "I feel better, like I won't freeze up if something happens." Lovingly, "You did fantastic, but keep in mind that it's a responsibility, Kynes." Jake nodded solemnly. "Aren't toys. If you give him the incorrect order or at the wrong moment, it could lead to anarchy." For a little time, I understand the respect he was feeling as he envisioned the day, Rex. Would a simpler life of toys gradually replace that discipline once they retired? And snoozes? Or would the dog always be so alert that it was ready for a signal? That evening, Jake lay in bed listening to Rex's gentle thumps after taking a shower and finishing his schoolwork. Jake grinned and beckoned as the dog, who was wandering around the house, stopped at his doorway and poked his head in as if to say good night. He muttered, "Come on," and Rex patted inside, resting close to the base of the. Jake was peering at the ceiling with his ears alert for any noise. Considered how easily a bully, a burglar, or a threat could ruin a life. But Rex persevered through every obstacle. Resolute, a guardian who required unambiguous instructions and constant composure, they had. Jake had learned the repercussions of playing with the wrong dog, but more significantly, he had understood what it meant to be the ideal companion, providing Rex with trust, clarity, and guidance when he slipped off the. Rex felt calmed by the steady pattern of his breathing, knowing that tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Another school day meant another possible curveball, but because of the silent bond that had been formed, Jake felt prepared to confront it. Between a driven kid and a very skilled K-9 officer, and he understood that their relationship was unbreakable. In a modest manner, the sun had just begun to set when Jake awoke the following morning to the sound of Rex padding in the hallway. Reached the horizon, a gentle amber glow came through the blinds, and he became aware that he was feeling. Slept peacefully for the first time in weeks following the break-in fear and the ongoing drama at school. Had been difficult to come by, but he must have relaxed after his training session with Uncle Steve last night. Jake put on a sweatshirt and went to the kitchen, where he discovered his uncle drinking coffee, suppressing a yawn. Rex sat quietly at Steve's feet, reading the local paper, with its tails swishing. Jake muttered as he poured himself some juice every morning. "Uncle." Steve looked up and remarked, "Good morning. You slept well." "For once," Jake replied, offering Rex a. With a quick pat, he saw that local burglaries had increased on the newspaper's front page. Moreover, it included a blurry image of a suspect's escape captured by a neighbor's security camera, Jake's. Steve shook his head, his forehead furrowed, and he said, "They never caught that guy who tried our garage, right?" Jake agreed. "The department is on high alert, but we suspect it may be the same group behind multiple break-ins." He grabbed for the cereal box, swallowing uneasily and ignoring the recollection of the intruder's figure beside the fence. "At least we have Rex," he continued quietly, "and it's good to know that he's here." Jake's school days went very much as usual, but he did see some of Trevor's former crew. Particularly Marshall was hiding near the lockers, avoiding Jake with their eyes as though. After the incident with Rex, Jake couldn't help but feel happy that there would be no more conflict. After the last bell, he got on his bike and went home, hoping for more drama. Reviewing the advanced commands in his head, perhaps he would conduct another little session after finishing his assignments. To his astonishment, Uncle Rex believed that the better prepared we were, the better. When he arrived, Steve's SUV was already parked in the driveway. Typically, Steve was on duty until dinner time, so Jake put his bike down and rushed home to discover the house bustling. Steve was pacing the living room and talking on the phone with nervous energy as Rex sat. Steve's voice cut as he said, "Yeah, okay," alerting the adjacent ears. We'll get ready and be there in. He put a hand through his short hair and finished the call after an hour. When he saw Jake, he forced a stiff smile, saying, "Hey, kid." Jake blinked. "Well, how was school? What's going on?" Steve breathed, "And we received information about." The tip from the burglary ring indicates that they may be aiming for a business warehouse near the abandoned railroad tracks. Rex and I were given the task of watching the dog tonight, as they need K-9 units. It's a large operation with several suspects. Jake's stomach nodded. "Might be deadly. So you're doing a stakeout or something?" "More like a preemptive sweep," said Steve. "We'll look around the perimeter to check if they're there. If they do, we'll be prepared." He maintained a straightforward tone, but Jake could see the anxiety behind his uncle's. Jake nodded, suppressing his anxiety. "You guys be careful." A ghostly smile. He always caressed Steve's lips before going to the back room to get Rex's vest and equipment, the dog wagging his tail while his eyes glinted intently, obviously sensing a crucial task. Rex was trained to do this, so Jake could only observe with a sense of unease and pride. Because Steve and Rex left in the patrol SUV less than an hour later, Jake attempted using his homework as a diversion when he was left alone in the quiet house. But every siren-like sound as the clock ticked off, the thought of something going wrong made his heart skip a beat. Jake's nerves were jangled at 9 p.m. due to the feeling of waiting. Held his phone tightly in case Steve texted him that evening while he turned on the TV and partially listened to a replay of an old sitcom. Jake's nervous glances toward the front window eventually broke the monotony of each minute as it extended into deeper darkness. At approximately 10:30, Jake sprung to his feet as a pair of headlights flashed over the driveway. He was relieved to see Uncle Steve's SUV racing to the door as he peered through the blinds. Steve felt a shock of terror as he ripped it open, and he stood there and he slumped in exhaustion as a limp Rex rested against one of his legs. A portion of the dog's fur was stained with nicked blood from his ears. "Oh my goodness," Jake whispered. Steve shook his head, indicating that he was hurt, and he moved aside to let them enter. Countenance was bleak, and after a fight with a suspect, he sustained some bruises and a minor cut on his ear. But it's not life-threatening, but he's shaken. The veterinarian checked him out quickly, and we'll have to keep an eye on him overnight. Jake sank to his knees. The dog's eyes flitted in the air as soon as they passed through the threshold, and a hand was placed lightly on Rex's side. Fatigue, and he whimpered softly. "Are you brave, boy?" Jake said. Steve closed the door with a shaking exhale, saying, "He did his job." The perp tried. Rex knocked him down while scaling a fence, but the man with the metal rod managed to hit Rex, which could have been worse. Jake felt his throat constricted because one sentence contained so much. If the suspect had aimed, the dog might have suffered severe injuries, or worse if Rex hadn't responded quickly enough. "Let me fetch some towels," he said as he hurried to the restroom and picked up a fresh rag. Came back and knelt next to Rex, wiping the crusted blood around Jake's ear while blinking at his feeble tail thumping. Uncle Steve knelt down and carefully took off Rex's vest, saying, "He needs to rest. I want to make sure he's comfortable with me before I file my report." Got Rex to lie on a cozy blanket in the living room while Jake got water, and Steve took a closer look at the dog's ear. Rex startled when the department veterinarian reapplied the disinfectant they had given him, but he trusted their touch after. With a trembling sigh, Steve sank into the recliner and said, "They caught the whole burglary ring," he murmured softly, and Rex assisted in cornering the final man. "Good police job," but after witnessing him suffer such severe injuries, he walked away. Jake nodded, his heart thumping with, "Uncle Steve is the greatest. He just pushes himself so hard that he gets a little depressed. Yes, that's what he's trained to do, but I can't help it." Steve's lips curled into a smile. "He's been in a lot of stressful situations lately, so I'm wondering whether it's time we set up a comprehensive examination. I don't want him to be dragged into another vicious battle with Jake's stomach just to show off." Rex's retirement had been a nagging worry in the back of his mind, but seeing him hurt now made it feel. Steve may have acknowledged that it's urgent and genuine that you intend an early retirement. Massage the back of his neck and wait for the department veterinarian's opinion. If it's merely a scratch, it's okay. But if it's a part of a trend of too many near misses in a short period of time, he might have to resign before anything really disastrous happens. Jake experiences a brief moment of resistance, but he enjoys being a K9 and doesn't. Steve acknowledged that he is constantly incredibly focused on his work, but I can't allow that overshadow his health because I value him not only as an officer, but also as a member of. Jake looked at Rex, one of the family members, who had fallen into a restless slumber. A knot developed in Jake's chest as the dog's body shook a little, as though reliving the night's hunt in his dreams. He wished to prevent Rex from suffering any further injuries, but he also imagined it felt like a fish out of water when the dog's desire to serve was cut short by forced retirement. Uncle Steve must have noticed Jake's confused look because he stretched out to give his nephew a squeeze. Shoulder, no choices have been made yet. We'll collect information and monitor his recovery regardless. Jake nodded, tears twitching at the edges of his eyes. We'll keep him safe. He murmured that he was our guardian, but perhaps we should keep a serious silence for him now. Positioned above them, the living room bulb illuminated Rex's bruised body by casting gentle shadows on the walls. 3 soldiers fighting unexpected enemies on the blanket with the boy, uncle, and dog. Threats. And Jake understood in that silent moment that although bullies had been the least of their concerns, the actual struggles. Was it really possible for Rex to be safe in his own profession if he couldn't be safe in the line of duty he performed every day? Even if Rex was the best K9 available with delicate care, it would still be worth a risk. In order to support Rex during the misery of the night, they turned down the lights and remained by his side. As the minutes passed, Jake wondered if fate was guiding them to a new chapter where they would be choosing on just because Rex's time in uniform might be coming to an end in the morning, the wrong dog would be history. Jake woke up stiff from a fitful sleep on the couch, with little respite from the sun. Having fallen asleep while keeping an eye on Rex, the German Shepherd was still lying on the floor, occasionally napping restlessly. Uncle Steve stirred from a recliner and massaged his head, shifting with a quiet groan. Eyes and inquired, "How is the dog doing?" About his bandaged ear. Jake inquired softly. With worried eyes, Steve knelt down and gently patted Rex's shoulder. The dog bumped him, and he's been sleeping intermittently. He doesn't appear to be in any pain, but he's obviously not his normal self. Steve's hand, as though to indicate that he understood, was just worn out. We'll go to the department veterinarian today for a checkup if everything is well. Perhaps he will recover in a few days, but I still want a thorough examination, Jake. Steve sighed and swallowed a lump in his throat. But you think he'll be fine to continue working? Let's see what physically, perhaps, but there's more to take into account because he's had a lot of close. His voice has been burdened with duty lately, and I don't want him around. Load on his shoulders, Jake, and I can't allow him to suffer serious harm while I'm watching. Jake touched Rex's side and felt his steady but somewhat strained breathing. Each breath brought back memories of. I understand that the harsh world Rex lived in was full of bullies, burglars, and punishing takedowns. Steve feigned a mournful voice, saying, I just don't want him to be unhappy if he retires. He may miss his job, but dogs can adjust, so he'll have us later. On that day, they carefully loaded Rex into the patrol SUV, so as not to bump his aching body throughout the travel to the department. Jake tried not to think about the worst-case situations as he glanced out the window, as the vet clinic felt abnormally long. Rex appeared sufficiently at ease with his head resting on Jake's lap, and his eyes half closed while the prospect of the dog's career ending tormented him. When the office was closed, a kind veterinary technician led them into an examination room and said, We'll take some x-rays just to be safe, she continued, giving Rex a gentle pat. We want to rule even though he's a tough boy. Find anything more serious than an ear wound and a damaged muscle. Jake and Steve paced the corridor while waiting outside. Employees of the police department who are accustomed to watching K9 cops come and go periodically paused to inquire about Rex's well-being each. He was harmed on a call, and Steve responded with the same hushed explanation, hoping. Nothing significant, but there was a sense of understanding and empathy that this was the reality of working dogs. When the veterinarian finally came out, removing the latex gloves, there were no leg fractures, or she recommended a week or so of rest and minimally demanding activities for shoulder heads. Steve breathed a sigh of relief mixed with relief that another hit an inch lower could have caused more serious damage. lingering tension, which is positive because it means he will physically recover. The veterinarian verified, and she paused to look at Steve. But you said you had several calls with near misses. You may wish to take into account his general stress level. While some canines manage it for years, others reach a. Even while the veterans were kind, Jake's heart ached at the moment where retirement is kinder, even if they can still work physically. Uncle Steve murmured softly, "We'll talk about it," with a conflicted nod. The ride home was silent as they thanked her and led Rex back to the SUV, the dog going slowly behind a rigid gate. "So, does that mean you're going to retire him?" Jake asked, finally finding the nerve to speak that Steve's grip tightened. "Driving wheel. I'll talk to my captain and we'll see what they suggest. The last decision is partially mine and partially the department's. May want him on specific duties only if they believe he's still essential. But if I get the feeling he's not 100%. Jake observed Rex, who was lying on Jake's arm and panting softly. "Would that be so bad? I'll push for retirement." Steve shook his head, half hating the question. "I mean, if it keeps him safe." Lowhead voice is not unpleasant at all. It's simply different. Keep in mind that K9 dogs love their jobs, but they also need a fulfilling existence at home. Placed Rex on a heavy blanket and gave him the medication that was recommended. Remained vigilant and didn't object to the extra attention. Jake saw him licking at his bandaged ear and gave the dog a gentle prod. He gave a gentle reprimand. "No messing with that, buddy," and earned a quiet tail wag in the middle of the afternoon. Jake's phone unexpectedly received an SMS. Jake blinked when Trevor said, "Heard about your dog. Hope he's okay." He hadn't informed any students about Rex's recent injury, so word must have spread across the classroom after he read the message twice. Nevertheless, he quickly responded, "He's resting Vex." It's odd how the child. Uncle Steve momentarily left to complete some paperwork, as the person who had previously marked him was now checking in as the sun sank lower. Jake and Rex stayed behind to complete paperwork at the station, working on their assignments at the living room table every few minutes. He would look up, his heart squeezing, to see Rex sleeping and twitching sometimes in what could be a dream or a. Returning to the altercation that night, Jake pondered whether the dog dreamed about running after criminals or escaping an A. When dusk arrived, Steve returned a stack of folders under one arm and fell onto his sunny yard with no threats in sight. With a look of weariness on his face, he talks to the captain about not pressing. His tone was quiet, "But they're open to it if I think it's best. I'll make a final decision once Rex fully recovers, but I might not wait for Jake if we have another near miss." Nodding, he sighed thoughtfully, a knot of relief and anxiety fighting in his chest. "How do you think Rex will handle that?" "He trusts me to guide him, so he'll manage it well if I'm around. Perhaps we'll establish a new regimen that involves low-key training and quick walks. Each dog is selected for indefinite service after proving himself." Steve repeatedly reached out to ruffle Rex's fur. "But I'd rather have him at home safely than run the danger of his getting hurt or slain on the job." Jake's eyes pricked with tears, and he blinked. The dog licked Jake's cheek while leaning into them and stooping back to give Rex a gentle hug. "You deserve a break," Jake muttered, embracing with a gentle moan. "No one possesses the right to mistreat you or endanger you." He felt a feeling of thankfulness that the dog, despite being exhausted from the stress of innumerable calls, he was still breathing and heartbeat, and they had a peaceful supper. Jake. The mood in the house felt strangely cozy as Steve made new coffee and heated up some leftover pasta. Despite being aware that a chapter might be coming to an end by the time the dishes were cleaned, Rex had fallen into a tranquil sleep, snout perched on his paws, gazing at the dog's contented physique. Jake envisioned a time when they would be playing in the yard and not worrying about bullies or burglars. After dinner on leisurely afternoons, Steve showed Jake an old scrapbook that had images of Rex at his best days, competing in obstacle courses and sporting a medal from A. Even a photo of a happy child at a town fair featuring a K9 competition. Steve whispered, tapping a picture of Rex standing with other police canines. "I've never had a better career." Hesitated to defend others, but ultimately, every hero's path comes to an end. Jake's. His throat constricted, and he at last realized something basic about the choosing the incorrect dog involved more than simply underestimating a canine strength. It also involved failing to recognize the dog's heart, commitment, and dangers associated with helping others. Rex had devoted a great deal of his. It might be time to provide him rest after giving his life to protect the town. That evening, as Jake turned in, he ran a hand. The dog blinked up eyes and softly thanked Rex for everything through his fur, showing a silent commitment that didn't require words, regardless of whether Rex continued to serve or switched to a more serene. Jake was certain that nothing in life could sever the connection they had made. Together, they had endured hardships like burglaries and bullies, and despite the high price they paid, their loyalty endured. Jake felt calmer than he had in weeks as he lay in bed, unbreakable. That had previously troubled him had subsided in favor of a determination to cherish each day spent with Rex, regardless of how many or how few, because, in the end, the true strength lay in the unchanging love rather than the training or dog's teeth. In defense he provided in the kind manner, he would support Jake through every danger if the next course of action was retirement. But as long as they followed that route together, they would deal with bullies head-on. Under Uncle Steve's careful supervision, Rex's ear gradually mended over the course of the next week, which felt like a cautious return to normal. With time, the bruises on his leg and shoulder lessened, and Jake was relieved to check on him every morning before school. Observe the dog's gait gradually getting better. The limp that had been bothering him a few days before had disappeared, and Rex appeared happy to sprawl out in a spot of sunlight and nap at Jake's feet as he go around the living room. The silence of interest over Jake's police dog at the school window. Trevor's group of pals remained aloof, even after the intensity of that first encounter had subsided. On one occasion, Jake saw Trevor in his locker, but there was no more harassment. Rumor had it that his parents had grounded him indefinitely for opening it with obvious embarrassment. Their gazes locked for a brief moment, and although neither wavered, there was a brief feeling of understanding between them that they were finished with. One afternoon, after class, Jake got into a fight and got on his bike, drifting to Uncle Steve's assurance that if the dog's examination was positive, a final decision on Rex's destiny would be made. Jake's gut churned as he considered if Steve would keep him on the force, or if a more tranquil existence at home would be a safer option. Had mixed feelings, divided between respect for Rex's ability and he stopped when he drove onto his street since he was worried about the dog's welfare and the sun was lowering. Seeing Uncle Steve's SUV in the driveway, apparently on a day off, he pushed inside and said, "I'm home." He heard a muffled bark and a wave in return. He felt a wave of relief when he heard Rex's voice, which was full of fire and emotion. In the backyard, where a tiny agility setup consisting of improvised hurdles and tunnels was shining, Jake discovered Steve and Rex. With amazing speed ears, the fading light Rex sprang over a low hurdle. Jake's jaw dropped a little when he saw the dog's pricked tail swishing. A few days prior, the dog had been limping, and Steve turned. Grinning, the child wanted to try his mobility and didn't appear to be in any pain. Rex ran in a tight circle around them, as if to reaffirm the assertion. She landed beautifully, trotting over Jake for a quick hop after jumping neatly over a hoop that was supported by a sowers. "Nice pat." "That's fantastic," Jake inhaled, causing the dog's fur to ruffle. "So he's recovered essentially." "So," Steve responded that the veterinarian approved. "He hasn't done any high-risk takedowns or furious chases yet, but he's clearly regained his spark, Jake." For a brief period, pure delight filled his chest as he watched Rex waggle and sniff the grass, saying, "That's amazing." I was concerned that he would be out for weeks. "Me too," Steve acknowledged, pausing. Expression becoming more contemplative, "The department is scheduling him for a meeting, but we do need to discuss what's next. Comprehensive reassessment in a few days to see whether he is suitable for full service." In the meantime, the captain inquired as to whether Jake's stomach nodded. "So I would think about allowing him to continue in a restricted capacity, such as search responsibilities, without fear." Steve groaned and ran a hand through his short hair, asking, "And what do you think? He still has enthusiasm and talent, but should I risk another risky altercation? Perhaps controlled role would be the safest option, or retirement, depending on my decision. Some people might doubt it." Jake looked into Rex's eyes as if seeking direction, then reached down to scratch the dog behind the ears. The shepherd looked back, breathing a little, exuding such complete trust that Jake's eyes pricked with emotion. Jake recognized that if it protected us, he would most likely jump into danger without thinking twice. But is it really good for him? Steve nodded when Jake whispered quietly, "He can do the work, but you don't want him hurt. If only he could express his desires to me." But I had to function as his voice actor in. As Rex trotted to the constructed tunnel, they fell silent in his best interest. He looked back expectantly, plainly. Wanted to pretend that he was unaware of the important choices that were all around him. Jake. Taking the cue, he knelt down and said, "Go on." Encouraging. Rex sped through the tunnel and came out with a victorious bark. And Jake couldn't help but grin, saying, "Ease. Incredible. Always has been," Steve muttered, his voice tinted with pride. Uncle Steve spent that evening going through K-9 retirement policy documentation at the kitchen table. Rex slept close to his chair, distracted by other tasks and a backlog of case reports. Jake, exhausted from the outdoor play, lingered, partly wanting to assist, half wanting to. When the phone rang, Steve responded in a clipped voice, knowing that the seriousness of the situation was beyond him. "Yes," he said. After hanging, the captain said, "Right, the evaluation's still on. I'll confirm tomorrow." He looked up and saw Jake leaning on the counter. They will give him a final test that will involve basic obedience responses. If everything goes according to plan, he could continue in a limited role, but if... His eyes wandered to the dog's bandaged ear as they noticed even the slightest sign of anguish or physical limitation. Is it possible that they may compel Steve to retire early? Jake's chest was pressed. They might suggest it, but in the end, I have the call via the captain's opinion matters, but neither of them spoke further about the subject that night. Jake withdrew into his own thoughts, to his room in an attempt to block off his anxiousness by playing video games. But his focus kept slipping, so he ended up, reminiscent of bullies, burglars, and beaten people. He turned off the console early and collapsed into his bed to gaze at the ceiling. In his mind, years played like a montage of near misses that Rex was quite capable of, confronting those risks. But if he were to eventually succumb to tiredness, after a restless night of sleep, he wandered outside and discovered the house when he woke up to dawn peeking through the thick slats. Rex was sleeping on the couch, head lifting, and quiet Steve must have arrived at the station early for last-minute paperwork. The dog hopped down, walked over, and rested his muzzle when he detected Jake's presence. Softly on Jake's knee as if saying, "Good morning," to him in silence. Brushed the dog's ears and said, "Morning, boy," with a wave of love in his. Speaking, he was uncertain whether Rex would become a full-time couch companion or a semi-retired search dog. But he knew no. Rex would always be by his side, prepared to help, no matter what happened to their bond. The next 2 days were a whirl of anxiety as they tried to shield him from bullies, burglars, and anything else life threw at them. While waiting, Steve locked in the test date. Jake assisted with calling and occasionally ran quick drills with Rex in the backyard. Out the sophisticated orders he had learned, the dog did a fantastic job of healing, staying upright, and showing no symptoms of pain. Hesitancy in motion, but Jake's heart raced every time, recalling how quickly mayhem could break out at last. Jake, sporting a school backpack, lingered outside the front entrance on the morning of the evaluation to observe. When they were taken off, Rex, in his harness, jumped up and down like a happy puppy. Unaware of the seriousness of the situation, Steve gave his nephew a shoulder pat. "Be well, kid, and good luck to us." Jake smiled hesitantly and leaned forward to plant a kiss on Rex's. As the SUV drew away, he murmured, "Good luck, buddy," while the dog looked out. Bright-eyed window, abandoning Jake to go to a routine school day, while Rex had to take a test that would. Redefining his life, Jake got on his bike and pedaled into the future while feeling anxious. "Whatever happens," he said, "at least we know no one will dare pick on this dog again," he assured himself, since he earned that respect by riding off the fresh air on his cheeks with a silent wish that this best friend of his who was bred to be devoted and fearless will at last discover the tranquility and security he was due, whether in a new position or in the relaxed life of a retired hero, as Jake rode his bike. In the early hours of the morning, Uncle Steve and Rex arrived at the police training facility on the outskirts of town for school. Sliced through the remaining fog to show a number of government vehicles and a vast area of practice grounds with obstacle courses. When the SUV was parked close to a sizable building that resembled a warehouse, Rex quickly shook his head and sniffed, the air as if he was familiar with the location. "Easy, boy," Steve whispered, shifting. He attempted to appear calm while wearing the dog's harness, but there was a knot in his stomach. Of nerves, this was not only another work day. Rather, it was the decisive element in determining whether Rex would continue to be inactive. Sergeant, a tall, broad-shouldered man, is a K-9 officer or retiree. Harris came over with a clipboard in hand and met Larson in the morning, offering a. Steve cleared his throat and nodded quickly, indicating that he was as prepared as possible for the evaluation. He felt the dog's muscles strain with anticipation as he stroked a hand along Rex's back. "He's recovered nicely from the previous incident." Harris checked the clipboard, knitted his eyebrows, "and we have some things planned. If he's willing, Steve, I'll give him a suspect apprehension exam, basic obedience, and a brief tracking scenario." Mentioned that his heart tightened at the thought of suspect apprehension, which was precisely the type of high-risk situation that frequently resulted in injuries. But he reminded himself that it was a necessary component of the evaluation before they entered a grassy field, where a younger cop waited wearing a padded suit, bite sleeves, and a secret scent trail, and other K-9 units occasionally utilized this area for advanced training or re-certification exercises. Rex's tail waggled during training, as if he was eager to demonstrate his abilities. Steve tried to ignore his nervousness while kneeling to make one final check of the dog's vest. Harris remarked, "All right, let's start with a basic recall and agility." He positioned himself at one end of the field as Steve led Rex to the other end of the room with the intention of letting the dog go and then calling him back with an order. Steve took a deep breath, unclipped the leash, and let Rex run for the dog, testing rapid response and instant cooperation. Rex skidded to a stop in a matter of seconds as he ran toward Harris, who clapped his hands and yelled, "Come here, buddy." Steve gave a quick whistle to halt the tail wagging, and then he gave the order here, and Steve felt a glimmer of pride when Rex abruptly turned and raced back across the grass. With pleasure, he saw that his buddy had skidded to a stop at his feet, panting but with sparkling eyes and no sign of a limp. Then low hurdles, a brief tunnel, a temporary wall, and a short obstacle course. Crossed the obstacles with ease, rushed into the tunnel without thinking, and leaped onto a low. Just prior to jumping down, despite the unpleasant ear wound, there were no symptoms of weariness or pain. Seemed to be recovering well. He shook his head once, but generally didn't seem uncomfortable, and Sergeant Harris made notes. Occasionally nodding on a clipboard, he whispered, "Looks nice. He's displaying good form, no timidity." Then he looked at Steve thoughtfully, as if he were awake. Steve's stomach turns if we skip the suspect apprehension scenario. Might claim that he isn't suited for full duty and that doing so could make his injury worse, but Rex stood by his side and listened. Steve thought out loud and nodded, his forward posture poised, showing me he's ready. Thus, they proceeded to a fenced-in area where a junior officer was waiting, wearing a thick, padded sleeve. The plan was simple. The suspect would act like they were running away, and Rex would follow and grab onto the cushioned sleeve. Command, then instantly release when directed in a traditional K-9 demonstration. Rex's hesitation or difficulty would indicate a lack of motivation if he performed well, demonstrating that he was still capable of managing the demands of apprehension. Steve placed Rex beside him. Rex healed the dog by taking a soothing breath, and the dog's eyes were fixed on the figure. Sergeant Harris was standing close by, keeping an eye on the fictitious suspect, shouting. Steve tensed and turned to go after saying, "You'll never catch me." He hesitated for a moment, sufficiently to let the culprit to get away before ordering, "Rex, get him." In a flash of muscle and concentration, Rex leaped forward like a coiled spring. The thick sleeve appeared in defense as Rex quickly caught up to the escaping officer, clamping down on it with a. The suspect faltered under Rex's intense hold, but his training prevented him from running for exposed places. Instead, he held tight. Steve's heart was racing as he growled low, controlling the suspect's movements. Please don't allow him to tamper with his leg or ear. He stepped forward, spoke louder, and the dog let go, dropping. The officer with the sleeve cautiously stood and nodded as the muzzle curled into a perfect down position without lunging. Sergeant Harris gave a clap of applause, saying, "That's textbook apprehension. Well done." Steve, who was still on guard, breathed a sigh of relief as he applauded Rex, who waved his tail, flooding him with a clean takedown without hesitation or suffering. To ensure consistency once more, Rex ran a condensed version of the scenario. Steve observed no limping thereafter, just a quick shake, and perfect obedience to orders without missing a beat. Even Sergeant Harris appeared impressed, scrawling frantically on the punctured ear, and his colleague was incredibly keen. Harris stated on the clipboard, "Honestly, Larson, that when they reassembled, Rex was in excellent condition and showed no signs of fear or Steve's mind physical constraint. If you feel comfortable, we can release him for further active duty." Relief soared as Rex aced every test. Yet the old fears still lingered, remained after the numerous near misses, the wounds accumulating, and the bandaged ear. He looked at his dog, wondering if it would be wise to push him more while he was still mending. Steve was panting happily, as though he was saying, "We nailed it, boss." Acknowledged that although the official recommendation might keep Rex on the force, the final decision rested with. He was in charge of protecting Rex's future as the dog's handler. "Thanks, Harris," Steve said in a voice. Quiet, "Thank you. I'll inform the captain that we will remain on active duty for the time being, but we may discuss limited assignments." He wasn't really committed to an endless continuation, so perhaps we'll choose. He carefully handled our calls internally, and Harris nodded, understanding if. Simply mentioned Steve to put him on specialist duty, such as detection, rather than apprehension. Kneeling and ruffling Rex's fur, he muttered, "You did great, buddy," to which Rex replied, ignorant of the emotional struggle in his handler's heart. He licked Steve's hand and said, "For the time being, we'll continue." Himself, "But I'll exercise greater caution." They split up, with Harris going back to the. Rex leaped into the SUV in the bright midday light, tail swinging as though he was happy with. Steve paused to reflect on the day's success, recalling all the times they had practiced in the field. From Rex's first days to more complex classes, every turning point had made them a strong partnership, and now, they had demonstrated that they could still withstand the pressure in the fall of Rex's career. "Let's get home," Steve stated out loud. Jake is surely anxious to know how things went as he slides into the driver's seat, and a small smile appears on his lips as Rex thought, he'll be thrilled, picturing Jake's face when he received the wonderful news. But does that mean we're safe from more heartbreak? Was the question that followed. With a hint of worry, the return journey seemed unreal. Rex was stretched out in the back seat, occasionally huffing in satisfaction, as if an unseen clock were ticking away overhead. Although they had prevailed, the struggle against risk and time persisted for the time being. Nevertheless, they at least had a victory moment, demonstrating that despite injuries and near misses, this wasn't nearly the. As they pulled into the driveway for their final chapter together, Steve noticed Jake's bike leaning against the. As Steve opened the SUV door, Rex leaped down excitedly, indicating that Jake must have hurried home from school expecting news. Jake was looking around the yard for his young friend when he finally came out the front door, his eyes bright with inquiries. "Well," he said, panting, "how was it?" Steve brushed his hair back in Jake's. "Feeling proud. Free hand says he passed with flying colors. Youngster, he's still the wrong dog for any troublemaker to mess with." Rex gave a single bark, and Jake smiled as though he agreed, squatting to give Rex a hug, relief emanating from him. "Wonderful." Jake cried out. Steve nodded, but there was still a glimmer of worry in his eyes as he said, "So he's staying on the force." Conveyed a warning. "Yes, but no more daily frontline, on specialized duty." "Jake, the department is fine with that approach as long as calls aren't absolutely necessary." Exhaled with a mixture of appreciation and acceptance on his face, which is safer for him. Exactly like Steve. Reaffirmed that although we still have more obstacles to overcome, we will at least do so on our own terms. Rex seems to be aware of the. His tail waggled so forcefully that his hips swung in that unified cry of oneness. There was a deep sense of relief and hope when the father, son, and dog had made a decision that struck a balance between Rex's preparedness and the vigilance required by his hard-won scars. And for as long as his, Rex's devoted heartbeat would make him the one canine that no bully or robber should ever. Jake let out a sigh of relief as he fell into the couch as the Larson living room was illuminated by sunlight. Uncle Steve had just completed describing all the specifics of Rex's evaluation, including how well the dog performed the agility exercises. In the interim, the suspect passed the apprehension test with flying colors and shown no symptoms of any lasting injury. Sprawled next to Jake, panting joyfully, as if he had experienced the victory himself. So now, Jake leaned forward and said, "He's on specialized duty," his eyes wide. "Detection." Steve nodded and took a seat in an armchair, thereby agreeing that the captain had. He concentrates on low-risk activities like narcotics, detecting, and search and rescue missions. It's not a complete retirement, but it's a safer method for him to employ his skills without resorting to violent takedowns. Jake experienced a rush of relief from pushing him too hard, which is ideal because he will still get. Steve's eyes strayed to Rex, but you don't have to worry about every call being some wild pursuit. Who is slackly, contentedly chewing on a rubber chew toy. I'll feel better knowing he's not fighting every shift, and if we notice any indication that he's having trouble once more, we may go back to retirement. Jake knelt down to the. Hearing that, "Buddy, you're still officially recognized, but no longer. Heroics just smell out illegal items and keep the street secure." Rex cocked his head, his snout twitching as though he was attempting to decipher Jake's tone. He licked Jake's fingers and tail, which caused the sight to. Only a few weeks prior, they had feared for Rex's life, and Jake's chest tightens with gratitude. Despite dealing with bullying at school, combating burglaries, and suffering injuries sustained on the job, he continued to soldier on. Unwaveringly faithful, they were startled by a gentle knock at the door, which made Rex jump. Leaping over, Steve rose, and indicating that the dog should remain back, he opened the. Jake saw a familiar face at the door. It was Trevor, who was standing on the porch in an uncomfortable position. Tension hit him instantly. Trevor, the thug who had fought with Rex, briefly appeared in Jake's veins, but Uncle Steve saw Jake's surprise. Steve said courteously, "Can we help you?" with a neutral look. Trevor cleared his throat, his eyes darting anxiously to the dog. "That's Jake, I guess. I just wanted to chat for a little." Jake came up behind Steve, he said, asked warily, "What's up, Trevor?" as his hands pushed into the doorway. "According to several students, your dog is like a hero K9 in his pockets. You mentioned that he had previously been harmed, so I just wanted to let you know that I'm relieved that he is now okay." His eyes also flicked to Steve. "I apologize for bothering him. That was foolish." Jake looked at Steve, who just arched an eyebrow and moved aside to let Jake deal with it. Jake swallowed and replied, "Thank you, he's well now." But that was. Trevor's face tensed in shame. "Look, man, I was a jerk trying to show off. I suppose your dog would have fled if he had truly attacked me." He shivered at the thought, then squared his shoulders and muttered, "I understand why they say he's the wrong dog to choose." Despite the strain, Jake laughed quietly, saying, "He's absolutely not the dog you wish to agitate." Observing the atmosphere, Steve gently placed a hand on Rex's collar and fully opened the door. "Rex is genuinely rather amiable if you don't." Trevor blinked, fear darting his eyes as he threatened him and wanted to say hello. Eyes. But his curiosity overcame him, and he entered, staring at the German. The shepherd Rex raised its ears to scent the air, but did not snarl or bare its teeth. Instead, he moved his muzzle closer, and Trevor reluctantly took a breath. When Rex just wagged his tail, Jake noticed that Trevor's tense posture eased a little as he let the dog smell his hand. "You see," Jake added gently in a courteous greeting, "he's not out to get you just. Don't approach him with a stick." "All right," Trevor said, hardly laughing, then scratched Rex's back. The dog leaned forward, and the ears showed no signs of animosity about their previous altercation. "He's cooler than I thought," Trevor said, his shoulders sagging with relaxation. Uncle Steve watched the conversation with his arms folded and a small bend at the corner of his. Although the apology may not completely resolve the conflict, it was a step in the right direction. It required bravery for a child like Trevor to swallow their pride and show up at their door. Anyway, just sorry for real. Jake nodded, crossed his arms, and the youngster eventually cleared his throat before stepping back. Trevor said a brief farewell. Let's keep it that way since it's in the past. Steve shut up and shuffled out the door, the tension barely remaining for a few minutes before fading. Look at Jake, who showed courage by saying, I guess your dog left a reel. Jake's pat on Rex's side was, in my opinion, the finest result. Nobody was harmed, and they learned their lesson. Steve spent the remainder of the afternoon finishing up some paperwork related to Rex's new position in a cheerful and optimistic manner. Jake assisted with preparing a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables as they conversed in the department. Regarding school the following weekend and strategies to keep Rex interested without running the risk of experiencing severe stress in the evening. Jake, for the 100th time, he was lying on the floor of the living room reviewing fundamental commands with Rex. Stay, he muttered, stepping. Rearward stay. The dog's eyes were fixed on Jake's face, and it did not move. Jake grinned and said, Okay, come, after a few seconds of waiting for the release. Rex's pattern of bouncing ahead with his tail swishing was reassuring and a reminder of their relationship, Uncle Steve observed while sipping tea on the couch. You've been really good at that, he noted, and it's clear that Rex respects you. Jake's cheeks warmed up with pride. He recalled the time Rex snapped a bully stick in his face and remarked, I mean, after everything. Each memory pulsed with the times he'd endured injuries for the work, including the half-night he repelled a burglar. Expressions of gratitude. He saved me in more ways than one. Steve sat down his tea. He has that impact on individuals, he added gently, his tone containing a hint of affection and the seriousness. Hovered over Rex's new specialized role, but for the time being they relished the peace. Nightfall, allowing any more pressing concerns to subside, Rex fell asleep between them, comfortable as ever. Jake went through his social media and messages just before bed, and a slew of. When he noticed no fresh reports or drama about bullies or break-ins, he felt a wave of relief. Perhaps this is finally the end of the world. The picture of Trevor's unsure smile flashed across his head as he stabilized, and he gave himself a little. Even those who had previously behaved as foes may change their ways if given the motivation, as Jake demonstrated. Rex, hyper-aware as usual, followed the dog to his bedroom, where his ears twitched at every creak in the old floorboards. As he crawled into bed after turning out the lights and allowing darkness to descend, Jake felt Rex circle a few times before resting down. In that silent silence, lad, down at the foot of the bed, vigilant and guarded. Dog fell asleep. Jake might not have known, but he believed that tomorrow would bring another day and another test. No bully or burglar could outsmart a canine's nose, and they would weather the storm together, even if the world remained unpredictable. Would dare mock a dog that could smash a stick in a single snap. And thanks to Uncle Steve's meticulous preparation, Rex's, with a song of serenity encircling them, the future appeared safer than before. Jake's final conscious thought was about how infrequently we are given second opportunities in life to patch things up, say I'm sorry, or to decide on a better course. Rex had been beaten by fate and emerged stronger, creating enduring relationships in the process. Jake pondered, his lips twisting into a sleepy smile. They picked on the wrong dog. Demonstrated that he was the ideal dog for me. As Jake began his day, a cool fall wind rustled the trees outside. Feeding Rex, while making sure the bandage covering the dog's ear stayed clean, had mostly healed, leaving a pink scar that served as a constant reminder of Uncle Steve's near miss. Work with confidence, knowing that Rex was in capable hands, and that daily high-risk calls with Rex's new. Due to his specialized function, his schedule was more predictable. Most days, he and Steve helped with regular drug screenings, or carried out fast-paced building searches that were normally devoid of violent altercations or fast-paced pursuits that Jake couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction he got every time Rex came home safely. The dog appeared happy and was still willing to please, but that's good, right? Jake said to Rex, feeling more at ease without the continual fear of a life-or-death situation. The shepherd looked at him in the afternoon as he patted his flank and explained how you can do what you love without all the scary things. With kind, curious eyes that seemed to be saying, "I'm here for whatever you need." Over the course of the following few weeks, Jake's days were filled with schoolwork, school, and sporadic training sessions with Rex. Uncle Steve occasionally took the dog to work a regular shift at the station, but Rex usually got home before dusk. No more injuries sustained late at night. No more frantic calls, trotting in with a wagging tail. The silence around Pinewood High also persisted regarding violent suspects or crimes. Jake was left alone by Trevor's group, and it appeared that the other students had moved on to more recent rumors. On Saturday, Jake and Steve made the decision to walk Rex through the forested park outside of town. It wasn't a regular patrol or a training session, simply a trip to allow the dog to experience the fresh air and soft terrain while. They parked beside the trailhead, dressed comfortably, and brought a small backpack with water and snacks. They then let Rex loose. Who? Steve smiled and gestured for Jake to follow him as he raced forward with a burst of fun energy. He still has that spark, huh? Jake laughed a lot, and I believe that at least this would have driven him crazy in retirement. Rex kept close, smelling every tree trunk, because his specific role keeps him busy. In Patch of Leaves, many joggers strolled by, grinning inquisitively at the attractive shepherd, but nobody was afraid. Jake recognized how different the environment felt now that there were no bullies or mayhem. The dog's presence was merely a community reminder of safety rather than a weapon for takedowns. And as they continued, the trail ended at a tiny. Rex padded up to the bank and leaned down as the creek water rippled over the smooth pebbles. Jake squatted next to him and threw a rock into the chilly stream. Uncle Steve discovered a log to sit on while drinking water from a thermos while observing the stream and the ripples grow. Steve replied in a relaxed tone, "You know, I spoke with the captain yesterday, and he confirmed that he's pleased with Rex's performance and detection work. The organization has not voiced any serious concerns and believes he will perform satisfactorily until his official." Jake breathed a sigh of relief as he approached retirement in a year or two, which is fantastic. Rex can still serve for a year or two without being overburdened, so there won't be any regrets about not completely retiring him now. But after a contemplative pause, Steve answered with a half smile as, "We're taking less chances, and he's doing fantastic, so it feels like the right balance." He watched the dog pursue a fluttering leaf. "Remember how tense things were only a month ago? We wanted Jake to nod. I was concerned that Rex could have to retire or worse because of the bullies and the burglar." Steve's eyes darkened momentarily as he remembered those near misses. "Yes, it was touch and go, but I've discovered that problems can arise at home or at school, so having Rex around is beneficial as long as." Jake threw another rock into the river, recalling that day outside the school gate as we guarded him too. Rex's frightening growl and Trevor's mocking expression flickered through his head. If there was any positive outcome from the snapped stick, it was a greater understanding of Rex's skills and a newfound admiration from peers who understood that playing with a trained canine was a dumb idea even. Trevor's guilt demonstrated that people may change when confronted with the intruder and the reality of actual threat. Scare that made him realize how dangerous a house may be, but also how important a watchful companion like Rex was to the dog. That same dog now ran among the leaves, ready to defend them if the intruder had pushed through. Carefree and unaware of the important choices that had to be made for his future, Jake looked at Uncle Steve. He gently stated that we owe it to Rex not only to allow him to fight for us, but to fight for. When he needed protection, Steve's lips curled into a soft smile. He's a fighter in more ways than one, and he's also a family Rex. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears, smiling at the happy pant, tail swishing as though attracted by their voices. As he watched Rex in this calm state, he became increasingly aware of how important it was that the dog's existence not be exclusively the specialized function, which was characterized by danger, was in fact the ideal compromise, keeping him interested without persistent dangers. They wandered the path for the remainder of the afternoon, pausing sometimes to let Rex investigate or chase the odd squirrel. Every stride felt like a victory lap following the grueling ordeal they had gone through. As the sun fell, they went back to their car, feeling a comfortable sense of exhaustion. Rex slept in a back seat muzzle while the radio played quietly on the way home. Jake, leaning on the window ledge, looked out at the passing landscape and reflected on how quickly everything had changed. He muttered to himself, "I guess that's it then," for a little moment. Uncle Steve, one hand on the wheel, said, "No more life-threatening calls, just a stable routine." Thoughtful nod, "We're better prepared, but trouble can always happen." Now, and if someone attempts to make fun of Rex once more, he grinned sardonically, Jake laughed, matching the smile. "They'll definitely learn the hard way." His thoughts strayed to the phrase, "wrong dog," which had come to represent the unwavering, devoted guardian that. However, Rex's greatest realization was that it wasn't only about punishing bullies or deterring criminals. It was about their strong friendship, which is evidence of how understanding and trust can mold a courageous canine. Mission into something deeper, a pledge of respect and protection for one another as they entered the driveway, Rex raised his head and peered about, using that constant alertness. But in the warm brightness, the stress of the past seemed like a faraway memory. When they parked, the dog's tail bounced out, and the early evening felt serene. Jake grinned and put a hand on Rex's back while wagging as if he owned the yard. In that instant, boy uncles and dog stood together in a finality that didn't feel quite like an end. "Welcome home, buddy," and more like to a peaceful, hopeful start as her clear Sunday morning broke over Pinewood, drawing families to an exciting festival with stalls, music, and a pumpkin theme is the annual Harvest Fair. Uncle Steve had been given a minor duty assignment, there to supervise security for contests, along with a few other officers. But these days the captain rarely brought Rex to public events, asked for a dog to be present for demonstrations and potential drug searches in light of Rex's new, no high-intensity conflicts looked to be a perfect fit for the specialist function. Just keeping an eye on the crowd, Jer, who was excited for a change of environment, joined them He was prepared to move between cotton candy vendors and neighborhood craft booths at the festival, wearing cozy sneakers, while Rex gently sniffed the air while strutting through the park in his proper harness, hoping to spot a tiny cluster of. Jake found himself when kids rushed up to gawk at the police dog. As midday drew around, Uncle Steve smiled and gently explained that Rex was kind until you caused trouble. Left Jake and Rex close to the stage area where a band was setting up while he moved aside to communicate with the fair officials. The sound of the drums made the dog's ears perk up, but he stayed calm and continued to wave his tail whenever someone passed by. Gentle waves. Everything seemed serene, even joyous, but Jake was unable to imagine a bright, happy scene with danger lurking in the background, and then in the distance when Rex heard a muffled shout, he froze, raising his hackles slightly. Following the dog's gaze, the tree and Jake angled toward a group of boos. He saw two individuals scuffling under a vendor tent beyond the whirl of fairgoers, one of them in a heavy jacket. Another shouted something incomprehensible, and a moment later, a terrified voice said, "Stop him, he's got my bag." Jake's heartbeat quickened, and a robber here in the middle of the day tightened his hold, looking for Uncle Steve on Rex's leash, but his uncle wasn't there. Many of the people in the vicinity were too preoccupied with the band warming up or the performance to notice the ruckus yet. Funnel cake lines, but Rex barked sharply as though warning of impropriety, and Jake instinctively responded, hurled himself forward, swerving over shocked bystanders. "Move, please," he called. Rex felt the dog's tension rising as he pounded the tether for a brief period of time. This was not your typical sit-and-greet situation. There was a frenzy of activity behind the vendor tents verified that a hooded suspect had pulled a handbag out of a panicked woman's hand before turning to flee. Jake suppressed a wave of anxiety since Rex is now trained for detection, not intense pursuits, but the suspect ran directly in their direction, attempting to blend in with the unwary crowd in case he became lost in, without knowing what else he may accomplish in the mass of fairgoers, or if armed. Mind-racing Jake recalled the advanced orders. There may be harm or panic if he allows the suspect to run through. When the suspect saw Rex's harness and froze, the decision was made for him. Could he allow Rex to do more than bark? In fright, changing course after learning that onlookers were obstructing their escape, the woman who had misplaced her luggage was almost knocked over by the thief as he swung around. Rex growled low, poised at him, and staggered after him, tears of frustration in her eyes. The suspect paused by Jake's side, looking for a passage, and then in a desperate attempt to reach the fair Jake, he leaped over the pottery table and lunged deeper. This was no harmless pickpocket. He's ready to bowl people over just to flee. Another cry with a trembling breath. Someone shouted, "He's armed," but Jake was unable to verify it, and he felt uneasy. Uncle Steve, he thought, looking around the crowd in vain. Time was of the essence if the suspect had a weapon. Running out, someone might get hurt. Jake grabbed the leash and stepped forward, saying, "Rex, find," in a commanding voice. The dog's muzzle sprang higher, its ears turning to focus onto the suspect's trail, his adrenaline crackling. "He's not." Jake reminded himself that he was no longer expected to do intense apprehensions, but the stolen bag, a terrified victim, and due to the suspect's hostility, they had to step in and corner him until help could arrive, at which point Rex fled. Jake followed, weaving between shock, his nose brushing the ground as he followed the suspect's new smell. People at the festival gasped as they saw the K9 chasing, several stepping. The guy reappeared in the next row of booths, perspiration dripping on his. With his brow gripping the pilfered bag, he saw Rex approaching and attempted to duck. Jake's heart was racing in his ears as he stood behind a cookery demonstration tent. Rex was fixated onto the scent trail, even though there was no direct line of sight. So, I have to believe that he would burst around the corner. They discovered the guy searching the sack for valuables. When he saw the dog Rex let out, the man's eyes jumped up and he began to swear. Out a warning bark that was usually enough to cause most crooks to freeze or fall to the ground. But this criminal, possibly driven by desperation, seized a nearby metal object, pulled from a display, lifting it like a weapon, and Jake remembered how Trevor's stick had almost. Fear tore through him, but he squared his shoulders and reacted calmly. "Handle this. The dog will advance its hackles up in anticipation if I issue the proper command." In a weak attempt to stop Rex, the guy swung the pole. Jake's voice faltered, but he said, "Drop it, don't. Get moving." He had never spoken so authoritatively. Rex snarled and moving closer, and with a strained gasp, the suspect's eyes darted from the dog's threatening pose to Jake's outstretched arm. Rex lunged harness made a huge error when he dropped the pole and attempted to bolt once more. Straining, but instead of clamping down as in a full takedown, Jake used Rex as the final instruction to get him. Made the robber stop in place by cornering him against a pile of crates and snapping his jaws only inches away. Jake was so near to getting bitten that his chest ached from fear. Controlled Rex's angle by stepping in leash taut and saying, "Rex, stay." He commanded, shaking his voice, and the dog complied. Within seconds, an elderly couple who had witnessed the disturbance fixed their snarling gaze on the quivering suspect, hurried over with an unidentified cop, and a second officer sprinted up a few seconds later, saying, "Finally, back up, drop down." "The earth." The guy raised his head in surprise as the cop yelled and pulled out his firearm. Jake tripped as his hands dropped to his knees and the stolen bag fell at his side. Rex remained calm despite his backward heart pounding so violently that he thought it may burst. The cop quickly cuffed the man with his head down, but remained steadfast in Jake's order. In the next sense of relief, Jake could hardly notice the surge of bystanders as the suspect retrieved the bag. Uncle Steve running onto the scene with a look of panic in his eyes, or the sufferer crying with thanks, piecing together the mystery by switching between Jake, Rex, the arrested suspect, and back again. "You're okay, Steve." Jake nodded, still shaking, and Rex trotted over, pushing his eyelids open. A rush of pride as he muzzled to Jake's leg, perhaps to make sure his mate was not hurt. And love almost strangled Jake, but they had done it without a full-fledged bite, and Chaos Rex had shown he could continue to guard even when on specialized duty, provided that the instructions were explicit. As the officer stroked Rex's side, the onlookers started to cheer and whistle in amazement. The victim hugged her retrieved bag and even praised him, saying in a whisper, "That dog saved the day." Jake could only nod in shock that he had just engineered a near-apprehension "uncle" as he said a sad "thank you." "Kid," Steve whispered as he led them away from the crowd, his heart still pounding. Then he knelt to say in a husky, emotional voice, "You both of you, holy smokes. No one is wounded. That's precisely what Stroke Rex's fur relief is doing to his features." How to operate a Specialist K-9 Jake. Little force, maximum control. "He's still the wrong dog to pick on him," he said, laughing shakily as tears pricked his eyes. Rex, the dog, licked his cheek and wagged his tail in a reassuring murmured hug. Bystanders and cops' wongs expressed gratitude for the rhythmic air swirl of fair staff. But Jake felt numb with. In that exuberant moment of adrenaline and thankfulness, the meaning of climax was very clear. It wasn't a violent conclusion. Showdown, but Rex's display of talent, loyalty, and self-control had shown. Again, that while playing a more subdued role, he was still strong, and Jake stepping, complied with the orders, and found a confidence he was unaware he possessed. The thief was taken away in handcuffs. The fair reopened with the recovery of the stolen goods. But there was a buzz of excitement mixed with the jeers as Jake departed. He couldn't help but feel the situation with Uncle Steve at his side and Rex at his heel. They had achieved the pinnacle of their comprehension of the dog's training, of their trust, and the secure settlement of disputes. Together in a glorious time without thugs, weapons, or a terrible conclusion. Just a safe conclusion for all parties concerned. And Jake came to the realization in the silence that followed that sometimes the biggest victory was not in striking a devastating strike, but rather in stopping one with Rex's new. They had discovered the ideal balance between safeguarding people and subduing them. Threats, but without the heartache of unnecessary violence. It was a conclusion that seemed as magnificent as any. Joyful wind sealed with a dog's soft tail wag. Jake and Uncle Steve soaked up a calm sense of victory at the harvest fair for the remainder of that Sunday afternoon. Families wandered from table to booth as the music continued to float through the late October air. But the one scenario that kept coming back to Jake was Rex's perfect maneuver of cornering the burglar without hurting him at all. The German Shepherd once again demonstrated to the world that he was a devoted protector and not just a police instrument, capable of mercy and restraint. Rex loped pleasantly on their way home. Despite the adrenaline, the dog's energy seemed limitless as their ears flicked at every wind rustling. They were all scorched. Uncle Steve grinned proudly and shook his head in. Surprised, he commented, "You two really handled that situation well, causing Rex's. I saw how you gave those," he said calmly, turning to face Jake. Commands with flawless timing and a soothing voice. "I'm proud of you, Jake." His cheeks warmed up. "Simply followed your instructions." And Rex completed the actual work without Steve's correction. Putting a hand on Jake's shoulder demonstrated teamwork, which is what handling AK-9 is all about. Is all about accepting the compliment in silence, even if you're just a stand-in. The concept of, he smiled at the stand-in handler, who had formerly been the anxious child who fumbled with orders and had now led Rex through a perilous situation without allowing fear to take control, and more significantly, they had stopped the escalation of an actual crime into disaster that evening. Jake sat cross-legged on the couch in the comfortable living room, rug as Rex stretched comfortably, muffling the dog's happy panting in his lap. Uncle Steve sipped tea by the window phone, matching the warmth in Jake's chest, buzzing with texts from coworkers complimenting Rex's prompt action and the relief that followed the storm. Jake ventured to gently stroke the silky fur surrounding Rex's. Steve specialized and had no misgivings about keeping him on duty. He inhaled slowly putting down his cup. He demonstrated that he is still capable of handling dangers today. However, in a controlled manner. It works best. He's doing what he was meant to do, and we're not pressuring him to live or... Jake nodded, and I'm just relieved that he started a pause as a wave. Death scenarios every night, filled with emotion, relieved that no one had troubled him again, or if they had, he demonstrated that he's still the wrong dog for it. They both chuckled softly at that line, which had become a recurring theme in their conversations. Rex blinked languidly, unfazed by human speech, from the schoolyard brawl to the harvest fair. Yet Jake understood. The following day at school, there were murmurs about Rex's valiant victory at the fair, and the dog could feel every ounce of love in the room. Spread swiftly, but in a good way, Jake's dog rescued a person's wallet, captured a burglar without tearing him to pieces because, for once, the conversation was sincere rather than filled with ridicule or dread. When their paths crossed in the hallway, Jake felt a wave of relief, and even Trevor managed a nod of respect, recalling how, just weeks prior, they had nearly reached a different, more dire conclusion, and by the end of the week, life had found its new balance. Uncle Steve occasionally brought Rex along while juggling regular shifts. For regular inspections, as Jake juggled homework with quick training sessions to periodically maintain the dog's skills. Jake will remember the bullies wielding that stick as they passed the fence behind Pinewood High. It seemed like forever since Rex's snarl. Yet today he traversed those hallways without a second look from anyone, confident that nobody would dare cause disturbance except for Jake's genuine metamorphosis realized had occurred within him. He felt more secure and self-assured, and in many. The town read for signs of maturity as the leaves changed from yellow to brown. Unstoppable as ever, winter Rex bounded through the crisp weather. Mounds of leaves every time Uncle Steve allowed him to go outside, and every night Jake discovered ease in the basic tasks, such as feeding Rex, rehearsing orders, or simply the tension that had previously hung over them like storm clouds had completely vanished as he watched the puppy sleep at his feet. We appreciate you coming along on this journey of bravery, loyalty, and second chances that follows Jake and his. If you were moved by our fearless canine companion Rex, please subscribe to our channel and enjoy this video. We'd love to know what you think about handling a problem involving the unsuitable dog, or what do you like best about trained dogs? Leave a comment below to continue the discussion, and don't miss out on for more real-life stories of tenacity, hope, and the unbreakable ties that bind us. See our upcoming video. Support enables us to share motivational tales with a community that values bravery, generosity, and the strength of standing up for. Here's to Rex, Jake, and the assurance that the best stewardship occurs when people and animals collaborate in perfect sync with one another.